Joe Swanson is a weird character. Not weird like the other characters where they're a psychopath, murderer, or giant chicken, like weird structurally. Over the years, Joe has changed perhaps more than any other character in the show, and a lot of people haven't really seen it as a good thing, which is why we're going to be taking a look at how Joe might be the most misused character in Family Guy.
You say the words Ocean State Follies, I swear to God, I'll empty my bag all over the floor.
In the early years we spent with Joe, he stood out among the cast. He was confident, capable, respectable, and could do things with no legs that people with 2 legs could only dream of doing. He's a disabled character, but that didn't used to be the joke of the character. The joke was that despite his disability, he's still one of the most versatile characters in the show. Peter envies him, the rest of the town respects him, and he was actually a good representation of people with disabilities.
Oh no, I've broken my legs!
Oh, how the times be a-changin'. Joe is essentially what you would get if you dropped an action hero in a world full of idiots, but now? I don't think you can use any of those aforementioned adjectives to describe Joe anymore. Miserable, pathetic, and downright sad are probably more accurate.
I'm a cop who can't save anyone. I'm a husband in a legless marriage. My whole life is a joke.
The guy's marriage is on the verge of collapse, his friends openly mock him, and his disability, the thing that gave him strength and depth, has now become the entire joke. This version of Joe is so far removed from the early season Joe that the only thing linking them together is the sultry sounds of Patrick Warburton. Whether he's a hero or a loser, I'm never gonna get tired of hearing his rich, velvety voice. But Joe stands as one of the clearest examples of Family Guy's comedy philosophy changing over time. All the characters have felt this effect, for better or for worse, but there's perhaps no one who's suffered more from it than Joe.
I stink at this.
To fully understand the fall from grace Joe's experienced, we must look back into his past to see just how much has changed in how the character is portrayed in the show. We'll start with his debut episode, Season 1's A Hero Sits Next Door. As soon as Joe is introduced, he pretty much mogs Peter the moment they're side by side. Not a very hard bar to clear, but we don't think there's a character in the show that makes Peter look like absolute garbage more than Joe. He's muscular, he's brave, he's endlessly positive, and he straight up saves Peter's life. I mean, look at his relationship with Bonnie. You can't even see a lick of wanting him to die in her eyes. But most importantly, the fact that he's in a wheelchair is treated as part of his identity, not the totality of it.
You! How came you by this metal construct? I demand to know who made you!
This distinction matters a lot because it reveals that the show had the intention of making him a legitimate character first and a source of disabled humor second. When we first meet Joe, the core of his character isn't let's all laugh at the wheelchair guy, it's how is the disabled guy cooler than Peter in every conceivable way. Again, the bar to clear is so low that a guy in a wheelchair could conceivably hurtle over it. Joe is essentially an antithesis to Peter. He's effortlessly competent, dependable, and he's emotionally stable. Well, initially he is. But not gonna lie, screaming until he's hoarse Joe is a peak version of Joe.
As such, Brian, Joe's stealing my thunder.
Hey everybody, time to limbo!
In a way, Joe kind of filled a similar role that early Brian did. He was the straight man, the one bit of normalcy that Peter's antics could reflect back off of. The irony of him being one of the few normal dudes despite having physical setbacks only makes his characterization a lot cooler. Every friend group needs that glue, and if Peter's gonna be an idiot, Quagmire's gonna be a pervert, and Cleveland's gonna be a wet paper bag, Joe's gonna be the one who grounds them.
And even though society has turned its back on you, I promise you there are people who care.
And there was honestly a time when Joe was one of the most fun characters to watch on the show. The Season 3 episode Thin White Line might just be peak Joe Swanson, going hog wild with his physical capabilities while still remaining true to what the show established. Giving him multiple opportunities to be more than the guy in the wheelchair makes Joe a character worth rooting for rather than one to take pity on.
Oh my God! Look out, Brian!
This is mostly a Brian episode, but Joe's competency and skill set really shine through in a way we don't really see nowadays of the character. I think Joe needs to beat up a group of criminals once a season. Nobody kicks butt quite like the guy who can't technically kick.
This could be the real deal, boys! Let's do it!
And it's scenes like this that made Joe unique, entertaining, and solidified him as the badass of the group. It's a shame we don't get a ton more scenes like it later in the series because there's just something really cathartic about seeing someone in a wheelchair beating up someone who's able-bodied. I'm not saying I crave blood, but karmic retribution tastes so sweet. Like blood. God, I could kinda go for some blood right now.
How do you like that? You're getting your ass kicked by a helpless spaghetti-legged.
But Joe couldn't always be this perfect, squeaky clean beacon of overcoming adversity. He needed to have some kind of hurdle that actually challenges the character in some way, and our first glimpse of that is in Season 3's Ready, Willing, and Disabled. We see Joe, the guy who always gets his man and always saves the day, actually fumbling to catch a perp, which leads him to question just what kind of man he really is. It also drives him to give his best impression of a St. Bernard giving birth. Joe's reaction is funny, but not in a depressing or pitiful way like the series usually does with this character. The comedy stems from Joe's reaction to a shortcoming rather than the shortcoming itself. Sure, we laugh a little at his misery, but the whole episode is about him rising above it and remembering the man he truly is. He manages to become a celebrated athlete, but after he finds out he was unknowingly given steroids by Peter, he gracefully steps down from his pedestal. Most professional athletes would try to cover that stuff up, but not Joe. Honestly, judging by his fits of rage, I would have thought he'd always been on steroids.
I'm sorry, everybody. I've let you all down.
But things eventually get turned around when he manages to catch the criminal he failed to catch at the beginning of the episode. This just goes to show that if you take your hurdles in stride and continue to power through the uphill battles, you too can accidentally kill a perp by severing his spine. That's a lesson I wish we all could have learned in our younger years.
Looks like you got more competition at next year's games, huh?
Nope, he's dead.
And an important part of Joe's disability, especially in the earlier seasons, was that it actually tended to reveal more about the other characters than it did Joe. Peter was often used as the mouthpiece for many's deep-seated thoughts about the handicapped, usually just the negatives. Peter could make jokes and off-color comments about the handicapped because the show always made sure to portray him as being in the wrong, and that has perhaps never been more apparent than in Season 5's No Meals on Wheels.
I wanted a cool restaurant, not the cafeteria at the Veterans Hospital.
After opening a restaurant in this episode, Peter begins to have mixed feelings when Joe brings a ton of his handicapped buddies to make the restaurant their new hangout spot. It doesn't matter that the place is now drowning in business and slowly allowing the family to work their way out of their debts, Peter doesn't see their presence as a net positive for the business. He was on that millennial social media business mindset before that was even a thing. Vibes first, quality second.
I don't want you and your kind eating here anymore. You're ruining what was supposed to be a cool establishment.
So instead of being happy for his newfound business, Peter decides to engage in targeted ableism by banning all handicapped persons from dining at his place because he thinks they cramp the place's style. After all, you don't want your customers to feel uncomfortable when they come to eat their steaks slathered in rat vomit. But instead of just lying down and taking this injunction, Joe decides to fight back in a way that most civil rights leaders would have done in the past. That's right, a big, giant robot.
Very well, Peter, you leave us no choice. Men, form up, drawn!
In the end, the scuffle leaves Peter injured and in a wheelchair, and after experiencing the life Joe lives every day for about an hour, Peter realizes the error of his ways. See, that's the beauty of Joe's role in the show. Not only is his handicap a source of strength for himself, but it's also a lightning rod for challenging cultural stigmas. Peter would always make jokes about people with disabilities, but the show was also smart at making sure Peter was always viewed as being in the wrong.
I've been in a wheelchair for 45 minutes now, and I see how tough it is.
Nowadays, Peter will just make a handicap joke and Joe will just sit there and take it. Heck, you may even agree with it. They really cut Joe's character off at the... No, wait, that metaphor doesn't sound right here. But the bottom line is that Joe's handicap wasn't just a pivotal part of Joe's identity, it was also a tool the show used to hold a mirror up to society's darker, misguided thoughts. Yes, we do in fact live in a society. Somebody had to say it. But Joe's characterization would inevitably see a shift. It wouldn't happen all at once, but cracks would slowly start to form in how Joe was seen by the showrunners. One of the most prominent moments of this beginning happens in Season 6's Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, where Joe undergoes a procedure that gives him his legs back. While this is first seen as a major positive, it quickly turns into a negative as Joe's newfound freedom leads him to abandon his old life, including his friends and his wife. Something with great power, Spider-Man, yada yada yada.
There's nothing to talk about. I've outgrown you, Bonnie. I need to spread my legs and fly.
But this episode fundamentally changed what Joe's disability meant to him emotionally. Earlier seasons portrayed Joe as someone who largely adapted and accepted his condition. Sure, he occasionally got frustrated, but his defining trait was his resilience. It didn't matter if he was in the chair or not, he was still the same person through and through. The wheelchair never stopped him from being any less of a man, but this episode decided to delve into the darker reality of Joe's predicament. What if Joe actually hated his life? I'd say join the club, but you were supposed to be the strongest of us all. I was rooting for you, we were all rooting for you.
Poor Bonnie. She deserves so much better than me. God, she must regret this marriage.
The premise of the episode itself is actually pretty solid. Joe regains the ability to use his legs again, and that newfound power begins to corrupt him, turning him into someone arrogant, self-righteous, and obsessed with physical fitness. If my calves looked like that, I'd probably feel the same way. And while it's funny to see Joe sort of spiral into more narcissistic tendencies, there's a bit of a darker implication underneath all of it. Maybe Joe's positivity was purely performative.
I realized over the last few days, the only reason I hung out with you guys is that I was and you were lazy.
Joe was always expected to put on a brave face and face his disability head on, and for the most part, he did. But it's quite possible he just did this to meet the expectations of others around him rather than actually believing it himself. As soon as he's handed a pair of working legs, all that talk of overcoming adversity and accepting himself goes right out the window. And let's be honest, it's not like Joe wasn't the most capable person in the whole show before he got these legs. Instead, in this episode, Joe lets his disability define him. When he's up and walking, his newfound legs become his new defining characteristic. It just has me thinking that if you're nothing without the legs, then you shouldn't have them. Man, a lot of Spider-Man parallels with this guy.
What the hell are you doing here, pansy?
We're gonna break your legs, Joe.
It's for your own good.
And the sad part about this episode is that Joe doesn't actually fully accept that idea by the end. He has to be physically paralyzed again in order to bring him back down to earth. And it's Bonnie of all people leading the charge on that. Isn't it kind of funny to see Bonnie shoot Joe for his own well-being? You give her a gun nowadays and she's for sure aiming above the belt.
Damn it!
Joe, I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible shot.
Joe acknowledges that he acted like a supreme jerk, but this episode doesn't end with him realizing that he was all the man he needed to be when he was paralyzed. It kind of feels like if he were given the same opportunity to regain his legs once again, he would just fall back into the same bad habits he once had. The guy just wants to go rock climbing. Can you really blame him? But while this episode actually manages to refrain from viewing Joe's handicap as a major disability, this episode would forever reshape how Joe, and eventually the show, would treat the fact that he's a paraplegic.
And once our injuries heal up, we can all go for a nice long walk.
All right! Yeah! Wait a minute.
But for a time, it really did seem like the show had found a nice balance for Joe's character. As the show entered the late 2000s, its humor began to become much more snarky, meaner, and seemingly less interested in portraying these thoughts and beliefs as morally wrong. So Joe definitely started to see a lot more jokes at his expense as time went on, but while the show was essentially punching down, it never outright killed his character. This can be seen a lot in episodes like Season 7's Ocean's 3.5, where Joe has to do everything he can to take care of his newborn baby.
Not being able to pay my child's hospital bill somehow makes me feel like less of a man.
That's relationship goals right there. Someone who will support and have faith in you while still being able to clean up your messes. Literally. So yeah, Joe had slowly started to lose some of his defining traits as the season went on. No longer was he seen as the incredibly capable individual who would take on all trials with a positive attitude and impressive upper body strength. A lot more jokes were made at his expense, but one thing remained. He always tried to do what was right for himself and his family. Now, he may not actually achieve those things, but he was still trying, you know? He would even go so far as to try to rob Carter Pewterschmidt for the hospital bill money, which, you know, is valid. It's always morally correct to try to steal from Carter.
Guys, put the money back and get out of there.
What? Are you out of your mind?
So while Joe was no longer seen as the bulletproof man who could rise above any challenge, the show still found a good balance in how to portray him. He was still a character the show could make increasingly crude jokes about, but the core fundamentals of his character were still there. Even if he couldn't solve a problem, he was still going to try, even if it meant getting laughed at along the way. This was possibly the closest Joe would ever get to a middle ground on the show, but as the seasons kept on coming, the ground would slowly start to come out from under his wheels. So while Joe's start in the HD era manages to be fairly strong, things start to really fall apart by the end of Season 9 with the episode Foreign Affairs, where Bonnie travels all the way to Paris to cheat on Joe. The show had sprinkled hints of their descent in their relationship up until this point, but honestly, they were mostly just on Joe's end. While Joe often believed himself to be a burden on Bonnie, she was always there to quell those feelings, showing that she loved him no matter what. Apparently, 10 minutes in a French city will have you throwing away your loved ones and have you wanting to start your life all over again. That's just the Parisian way.
Bonnie, for God's sake, stop it.
Lois, I already told you I'm in Paris to have an affair.
Later seasons of the show seemed determined to completely dismantle the relationship Joe and Bonnie once had. This became highly apparent with the characterization of Bonnie, a once caring and loving wife who actively began to despise Joe. And I'm not talking like an old married couple fussing over toilet seats being left up, like she may genuinely hate the man. This all stems from the active decision of the show to make Joe appear like more of a burden than he used to be. The once capable and reliable cop now seems to rely on his wife even more with things like changing his diaper. I guess you should have read the fine print of those wedding vows.
We've been married for 80 years.
You what?
Well, that's in married to a handicapped guy years.
But you would think that Bonnie would maybe feel burdened by having to take care of Joe, driving her to find someone more able-bodied. But no, she actually ends up meeting a man in Paris who's also in a wheelchair. See, she's not an ableist, she just hates Joe's guts. Isn't that better? This isn't exactly new territory for the show. Peter and Lois have been going through a similar relationship for a while at this point. While no relationship is perfect, the downfall of Joe and Bonnie's definitely feels like it kinda came out of nowhere. The only real reason the show gives is that they've been drifting apart, which is fine, but it just kind of seems to go against what they had been building towards by having Bonnie seek out a relationship with another handicapped man. And only a divine act of God seems to really change your mind. Some people's standards are just too high.
Oh, Joe, I love you. I love you so much.
I love you too, Bonnie.
This is a sweet ending and all, but this episode drastically altered how the show and fans would view the relationship going forward. Joe would become increasingly passive with the unhappiness of his wife, and Bonnie would remain dead-eyed and patiently waiting for the day Joe kicks the bucket. It runs over the bucket? Anyway, this would be the biggest deep dive into Joe becoming the sad sack he is today, and things would only continue to get worse from here on out. And the ramifications for this episode would continue to be felt in somewhat of a pseudo-sequel to this episode. Season 10's internal affairs would revisit the events of that prior episode, only this time Joe becomes paranoid, insecure, and obsessed over a misunderstanding of what Bonnie actually did while she was in Paris.
How can I put this delicately? He used his stinky French wiener to defile her.
So basically, Peter misunderstands what happened in Paris and assumes Bonnie slept with that other guy when in reality she didn't. Just an honest, trust-destroying, relationship-incinerating misunderstanding. And this gets Joe thinking, Bonnie's already cheated on him once, what's gonna stop her from cheating again? So this drives Joe into the arms of Nora, his newest police partner, who actually admires him and finds him attractive. And she's voiced by Anna Kendrick, so it's kinda hard to pass up this opportunity.
You know how they say never meet your heroes? Well, they don't say anything about kissing them.
Joe is against getting even with Bonnie at first, but this episode does not paint her as the most loving of partners either. She refuses to go to a party thrown in Joe's honor, all because she doesn't want to be looked on with pity by the other wives. I know you're dead inside, but it's a party. Just load up on cake and your free beer and get over it.
I don't know if I can take another evening of sympathetic eye contact from all the other wives.
Not gonna lie, this episode almost seems like it wants you to root for Joe to cheat on Bonnie. Yeah, she didn't physically cheat on him in Paris, but the fact that she was so emotionally invested that she contemplated moving to Paris for this guy sounds like a super heavy amount of emotional cheating was going on. Joe definitely deserved a win, but going against the book and cheating on your wife doesn't exactly fit the noble, honorable cop character Joe was once billed as.
I want a divorce!
You got it!
And now this episode makes Joe look even worse than before, being not only a sad sack, but a cheater as well. Sure, the episode wraps up with an emotional reuniting of the two, but the damage has kinda already been done to both of them. Their marriage will continue to go down the toilet, and Joe's characterization will continue to reflect that. Hope that one night stand in a handicap stall was worth it, but as those words left my mouth just now, I realized it probably wasn't worth it.
Oh, Joe.
Oh, Nora.
Did you bring protection?
Oh, don't worry, nothing comes out of the front.
And his marriage isn't the only family relationship he's had issues with over the years, as his relationship with his kids seems to be anywhere from rocky to non-existent. In earlier seasons, we saw that Joe was always a tough but fair father figure towards his son Kevin, but the two would later have disagreements over Kevin's military duty when he went AWOL on Thanksgiving.
Kevin, you're under arrest for the crime of desertion.
Yeah, but what teenager hasn't deserted their comrades and left them for dead? Even if I were an octopus, I wouldn't have enough appendages to count all those wild and crazy nights on. But while Joe isn't initially able to accept Kevin's rejection of his duty, it's his son reminding him that the right thing to do isn't always the law-abiding option that brings him around to his side.
There's right, there's wrong, and somewhere in between, there's life.
I know we're missing old Joe, but I don't know if anyone's missing Afro Joe. Kinda just gets more cursed the longer I look at it. But while this episode ends on a positive note, the two of them never really seem to fully rebuild their relationship. Kevin is very obviously going through some psychological trauma, and Joe isn't exactly handling it in the best way possible.
No, Dad.
I don't know what normal is anymore.
And as far as his relationship with Susie, it kinda seems non-existent, doesn't it? We rarely ever see Joe helping take care of the baby, despite this being the perfect setup for him and Peter to hang out more. Just two guys with infants hanging out, even though they probably shouldn't be left alone with children at any point. But Joe hangs out with Susie so little that it's actually no wonder Bonnie feels a little dead on the inside.
Can you please take my daughter out of the water?
Sorry. Congratulations, sweetie, you're a Christian.
But at least Joe can hold on to his past and be remembered as the hero he once was, right? Well, the show actually had a different plan. In season 11's Joe's Revenge, Family Guy decided to strip away the heroic accident that put Joe in the wheelchair, instead replacing it with a bit of a less noble disabling.
Then get ready to spend the rest of your life as a lame with an annoying voiced wife.
Clocked him big time, unfortunately. No wonder they needed to get this guy off the streets. He must be clairvoyant. So instead of the harrowing story about fighting the Grinch to retrieve gifts for orphans, it's revealed that Joe's legs were shot up during an undercover sting gone wrong. I guess we shouldn't be too surprised to learn that a fight with a fictional character didn't turn out to be true. But this completely reshapes his backstory in a way that isn't nearly as noble as it used to be. While Joe fell on hard times after trying to do something heroic in the original story, this just makes Joe look even more incompetent. Sure, going undercover is a brave thing to do, but we can't lie, some of the machismo and competency that Joe is known for have slightly faded away.
Bobby Briggs is the one who put me in this wheelchair. And they got him. They finally got him.
That being said, this kind of episode premise can work. This would make Joe a true underdog, becoming a hero after lying about being one, redeeming himself, and putting things right with the world. I mean, that kinda happens. Joe sort of just stumbles his way there and then kills Bobby by accident, so I guess he's a hero again? If we're counting heroes who are just guys who have shot and killed bad guys.
Oh crap, he's dead. I think he bled out. I must have hit the femoral artery.
Just kick him into Mexico.
While we don't think this is outright character assassination for Joe, it does kind of just add to the pile of negatives that have been placed on the character over the years. Can't we just let the man have one good thing to himself? And no, I will not accept light political comedy. Take that stuff over to CBS. And now is when we enter probably the bleakest era of Joe's characterization, the depressing Joe era. This is where all the sadness, all the jokes, and all the misfortune that have been targeted at Joe for the past several seasons finally start to come to a head. The season 13 episode Jolo might be perhaps the most blunt and revealing of this era because it finally allows Joe's inner demons to come out.
I gotta be honest, Joe. We came over here because we were worried about you, but these candies tell me you're doing great.
The episode revolves around Joe realizing that he spent his entire life trying to do everything the right way, only to still wind up miserable. He followed the rules, built a family, and tried to be responsible, and yet here comes Peter, waltzing into his line of work and becoming a hero in a matter of moments. That's just the benefit of being the main character, man. Us side characters gotta work extra hard to get anything in this world. For the first time in the show's history, Joe seems to be genuinely envious of Peter.
That thing you said about not thinking and just doing stuff. Did you mean that?
Sure I did, Joe. I never stopped to think.
It's then that Joe starts to believe that his entire life, everything he's done and will continue to do, is meaningless. An idiot like Peter can just achieve stardom by complete happenstance, while guys like Joe are just left in the dirt. So this drives Joe to call it quits on everything, his job, his marriage, and his direction in life. And if you're eager to hear what direction he's planning on taking his life, well, let's just say it's neither left, right, or up.
Goodbye, fellas.
Yeah, I don't think it's scientifically possible to get any lower than this. And just like that, Joe instantly became one of, if not the most depressing characters in the entire show. Like most of these issues, this type of character direction could be used to steer Joe to a more thoughtful, happier outlook on his life, but this episode really doesn't give us that. It does give him a moment of heroics at the end, but it doesn't really address the deeper emotional issues Joe seems to be dealing with. I'm doubtful that simply being recognized as a hero is the only thing Joe wanted in life. If that's the case, maybe I don't even like Joe. That's the outcome Family Guy wanted, right?
It took seeing you guys almost die to realize that life really is worth living.
Not sure how that's gonna fix your relationship with your wife, but I'm just glad Joe's got a smile on his face. But the misery train would keep on rolling for Joe with episodes like season 14's Papa Has a Rollin' Son, where Joe reveals that he spent his entire adult life hiding the fact that he's a paraplegic from his father. This episode reveals how desperately Joe craves approval from his dad and how much of his identity is tied to appearing strong and capable.
My dad doesn't know I'm handicapped. I never told him.
I think he'd rather you be handicapped than a blubbering mess in the bar. This is where men come to be men and drink their low-alcohol urine-flavored drinks. However, this does make perfect sense with Joe's earlier obsessions of appearing as masculine and strong as possible. Joe built up this identity that revolved around being a hero, and he thinks being handicapped will shatter the expectation his dad might have. Heck, it's been shattering Joe slowly over the course of this series. But this whole episode kinda revolves around Joe finding the confidence to tell his dad the truth and in turn truly accept himself.
It's only when your worst fears come true that you get to find out how strong you really are.
What's this? Character depth and progression? In my Family Guy? Yeah, truth be told, this is honestly probably one of the brightest moments Joe has had in later seasons. It allowed for some actual character growth that makes sense with the current variation of Joe we have. It recognizes he's down but not out, and the work the show does with his dad really helps to contextualize where he's at now. It's just too bad this mindset on how to write Joe doesn't stick around for very long.
I love you, son.
I love you too, Dad.
But for every bright light Joe would experience in the later seasons, there would also be a moment of completely snuffing out that happiness he had built up to that point. This is heavily apparent in the episode Brokeback Swanson, which not only sees him get more paralyzed, but it also leads to him being abandoned by everybody.
We didn't want to tell you, but we're going to the Seriously Wicked Bull Run. We didn't invite you because we didn't think you could keep up.
That's strike one. Not being invited to a group hang is already enough of a nail in the coffin for most people, but not Joe. He's gonna prove he can hang with the best of them when it comes to running away from bulls. Turns out the guys weren't being mean, they were just keeping Joe's best interests in mind. And now Joe has to reckon with that old saying, you mess with the bull and you get trampled nearly to death, leaving you unable to feel the rest of your body.
I can't feel anything below my neck. I can't move a muscle, guys.
This episode is kind of the focal point of what the series wanted to do with Joe for many years, have him suffer. Don't get me wrong, suffering can be funny. That sounds incredibly psychotic, but I think there's some truth to it. Suffering can be funny when it's latched onto a character who actually deserves it. We like to see someone like Peter or Brian suffer because more often than not, they're the cause of it and the universe is karmically getting back at them for being insufferable. But what bad has Joe ever done? Been mildly annoying and telling boring stories? If that was the threshold for the universe getting even, I would have been hit by a meteor a long time ago. But the show really subscribed to this idea that kicking a guy who's already down is pretty funny, and while there may be some minor truth to that, we think it goes a bit too far with Joe. Once again, Bonnie decides to abandon him when the going gets tough.
I'm leaving Joe and moving to Europe. I didn't sign up for this.
Buddy, wait. God, this is awful.
The thing with Joe and Bonnie's relationship is that it often just feels so one-sided and mean-spirited. Peter and Lois's volatile relationship makes more sense, but having a wife lose all passion for their marriage while her husband is slightly boring hits a little close to home. Additionally, this whole episode is a great demonstration of what Joe means to the friend group as well. As weird as it seems to say, he's the fourth wheel, which isn't usually a problem unless you're trying to ride a tricycle, I guess. But Joe always kind of seemed like the one the group wouldn't mind leaving out, evident by the beginning of the episode and the fact that Joe just gets left in a home by them when they can't figure out what to do with him.
Hi, can I help you?
Yeah, this is Joe Swanson. We arranged for a 9:15 dump-off.
There actually might be a bit of a reason for this. Joe is kind of the transplant of the friend group. While Peter has known Quagmire and Joe for years, even going back to when they were young, Joe is the most recent addition to the friend group, and sometimes they're seen as the odd ones out because the group was so used to operating as a three-man group for the longest time. But this isn't me cutting these guys some slack. The way they treat Joe is super scummy. Sure, they shouldn't have to be entrusted with taking care of him 24/7, but throwing him in the loony bin? There are some fates worse than death, and this might just be one of them.
Thanks, guys. I'd say let's get my stuff, but it's all been stolen.
And things with Joe and Bonnie's marriage would just continue to be rocky from here on out, never really managing to find a happy middle ground for the two except for brief moments. Heck, Bonnie even ends up running away with Brian of all people in the Heartbreak Dog.
I'm 46, and all I've ever done is take care of Joe.
Yeah, maybe Joe would be better off without her if Brian was enough to steal her away from him. This would pretty much continue to be the defining idea behind their relationship. Bonnie is unhappy with their marriage, and Joe is either too oblivious or too incapable of making it better. It's gotten so bad that Bonnie's actually started dropping not-so-subtle hints that she's preying on the day an accident makes her life all the more better.
If that were the case, I wonder if there's people on Craigslist you can hire to make that burden go away.
There are only two things on Craigslist: murderers and cars that break down the minute after you buy them. No in between. The show will try to have its nice moments with the two of them, but really they're pretty few and far between. We always tend to get them at the ends of episodes like the Heartbreak Dog, more as an expected obligation rather than an actual believable ending. Yeah, they're happy now, but it'll only take an episode or two for Bonnie to go back to microdosing rat poison in Joe's coffee.
I promise I'll spend the rest of my days taking care of you, just the way you've always taken care of me.
It's episodes like this that got us thinking, does the show hate Joe? Hate is a bit of a strong word. I don't think the writers are kept up at night imagining all the different ways they would make Joe suffer, but it is weird to see a character lose almost all of his agency. His entire existence on the show seemingly just boils down to disability punchlines and marriage regret. There's hardly anything left of Season 1 Joe outside of the fact that he's still a cop, and even that seems like a career he might be on his way out of.
Sort of had a mental breakdown in April. No more bullets for this guy.
Truth be told, Joe is a victim of the same kind of evolution to his identity that has befallen so many other characters in the show. Brian's become dumber, Quagmire's become more of a stick in the mud, and now Joe's just a tragic sad sack. Characters are expected to grow and change over time, but can this really be considered better than what he once was? So now we're mostly just left with the question, why?
He was asking too many questions.
Why did Joe go through such a drastic characterization change? Well, there might be a few reasons. Firstly, Family Guy changed. As the years went on, the show became less about slightly outlandish reflections of our own lives and more about seeing how far it could push things. How violent could the show get? How gross could the visuals become? How many episodes could be padded with jokes or cutaways that do nothing but waste time? Joe would fall victim to this mindset as the show began to wonder just how much emotional suffering they could put him through. The thing with Joe is that he seems to be without a breaking point, meaning all this hardship isn't ultimately building up to any kind of blow-off. He just sits there and takes it, and while that's sometimes funny, it doesn't exactly make you feel good about any of it.
I'm a father!
You're a two-wheeled monster!
Secondly, Joe's competency was possibly reeled back because he could have potentially become a skeleton key for most comedic situations. Family Guy's erratic form of comedy works best when there's no one prepared enough to figure it out, and a highly capable Joe might have made it tricky to write stories around him. Toxic positivity can be just as bad as extreme sadness. We didn't need Joe going full Ned Flanders on us. Even Ned Flanders would become too Ned Flanders over time. What we're getting at here is that it's quite possible that the show wanted to throw out the idea of having a straight man and just make everybody some type of extreme. But in doing that, Joe sort of lost his narrative purpose.
Excuse me, folks. Do you have a daughter named Peppa?
Yes.
You're gonna want to sit down.
Originally, Joe was meant to challenge Peter. Peter felt inadequate around him as Joe exposed his immaturity and insecurity. Him being handicapped only further drove home the point that anyone could be a terrific husband or star member of the community if they were to only try. And Peter wouldn't try, which would lead to Peter deservedly getting his comeuppance. But now, modern Joe mostly exists to make Peter feel superior. Can you believe that Peter and Lois are actually a more loving couple than Joe and Bonnie? I guess when you're both insane, it's usually easier to accept each other's faults. But this change meant the show no longer needed Joe to be admirable, they just needed him to be the punchline.
God, I wish it was Joe in that box.
I do too, bud.
Oh, did I say that out loud?
And there's a bit of tragedy to Joe that goes beyond the fact that his wife hates him and his friends only moderately tolerate him. Weirdly enough, Joe's descent into the butt of the joke is actually one of the more coherent downfalls in the show. Think about it. Remember how Brian used to be portrayed in the earlier seasons? He was smart, educated, and sophisticated. Nowadays, he's just a loser who convinced himself to think he is all those things. But to get there, the show kinda had to betray what Brian once was, mostly retconning him and ignoring the fact that he was genuinely intelligent at one point in the series. Brian's a whole other can of worms, but Joe might just be the saddest can of worms out of the whole bunch.
Wait, Joe, look over here!
Who's that?
This is because, unlike other characters like Brian, Joe remembers who he used to be. He's well aware he once had it all. The loving wife, the honorable police career, the respect of his neighbors and peers. And it's the fact that Joe has canonically gone from that to whatever he is now that makes this whole change all the more depressing. Joe carries emotional damage between episodes more than almost anyone else in the cast, with insecurities compounding over time. Remember how sad he used to be about the idea of Bonnie cheating on him? Now he pretty much just accepts it. They won't even let him sit in the room anymore, which might just be the most depressing realization of all.
Sounds like somebody's having fun.
Joe? I thought that was you.
Ah, goodness, no.
Modern Joe is seemingly built on just one humiliation after another. He's become worn down from years of mistreatment and sorrow, more or less just accepting a situation nowadays. I don't know if the writers intended to do that or not, but they've actually created a surprisingly tragic portrayal of a character losing his sense of self over time. Congrats, guys!
It's okay, I promise you it's okay.
I'm not sure.
It's okay, Peter.
But was Joe ever destined to become anything but this kind of character? Was he always meant to become the punching bag of the show, given what we know about how the show handles things like disability, race, and gender? Surely there was a path more befitting than this, right? We'd like to think so, at least. He could have continued to be a beacon of morality and maturity in the show while still maintaining his own frustrations about his life. We'd say keep the angry outbursts, but always find a way to rope him back into being a decent man. Think of him kind of like Mayor Wild West, but, you know, actually somewhat interesting.
Sarah Lancashire plays Celia's formidable daughter, Caroline, and
We believe Family Guy could have gone down this path, but it chose to stick with low-hanging fruit jokes that quickly became stale. We get it, though. Laughing at someone is pretty easy, while sincerity takes patience, something the show used to have at one point. But over time, the show seems to have prioritized immediate comedy over character consistency, and so we're left with a Joe meant to give us an uncomfortable chuckle rather than grow as a character.
All right, Gatorade's down, back on all fours in 3, 2, 1.
But maybe not all hope is lost in Joe. Every now and then, the show remembers that he's the one you want to call when you're in a fight or when your plane is hijacked. Not sure how he's going to get on that plane, but trust me, he'll find a way. But the show every now and then makes the most of the rolling weapon they have on their hands and occasionally allows them to shine, like in Season 15's Passenger Fatty 7 when he takes out a few hijackers.
Get off my double trouble!
And maybe the show needs to occasionally keep coming back to the idea of him being a good cop. You know, give the guy one thing he can at least feel proud about. The show remembers this every now and then, like in season 15's Cop and a Half-Wit, and it would be nice to see the show keep that consistency with this character.
Well, I'm proud of you, and you should be proud of yourself.
In a way, Joe's evolution over time has been indicative of Family Guy's evolution itself. Early Family Guy believed that cynical comedy could exist alongside sincerity, but more modern seasons increasingly treat sincerity as the joke itself. It's like a teenager who doesn't want to be caught caring about anything because it might make them look uncool. Only Family Guy's a 25-year-old man. But Joe sits directly in the middle of that tonal transition. What first began as an admirable character who wouldn't let the hardships of his life define him has slowly been dismantled piece by piece until he's no longer what he once was.
This Trout's the lucky one. It's over for him.
What's that, Joe?
Thanks, Bud. Looks terrific.
And sometimes it feels like Family Guy is actually aware of this problem. They obviously don't want to revert him back to the machismo on wheels character he once was, but they do seem to know that people miss that kind of characterization.
You son of a... It's a travesty! I will kill you!
Every now and then, the writers give us the briefest glimpse of the man Joe used to be. They'll let him be the smartest guy in the room. They'll give him a problem only he can solve. They'll give him the chance to dangerously fire off caps into a crowded room. Hey, people didn't like him because he was perfect. But every once in a while, the show will remind the audience that he was at one point the Family Guy of Family Guy. Now I'm starting to think Peter might have done some backstage shady politics to get Joe's character sabotaged.
Thank you.
But it's worth noting that when these moments occur, fans seem to respond positively. People like Joe. People want to like Joe. They want to see him find those moments of happiness, to rise above his disability, to silence the naysayers, and give the audience a feel-good moment that the show can be proud of. And if that happiness can come from an avenue that doesn't involve bad political comedy, then we're all for it. Look, I get it, it's easy to laugh at someone whose life is the equivalent of stepping on numerous rakes at a time. But people are looking for a character they can love as much as they laugh at, and Joe Swanson may just be one of the clearest examples of that in the entire series.
I know I crap on you a lot, but sometimes when I'm driving, I think about stuff you say and I laugh.
Thank you, Peter.
But we want to hear from you. Do you miss the old Joe, or is the newer Joe more to your liking? Be sure to let us know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.